Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I want to thank everyone for all their kindness and generosity in both time and contributions. Well, we had a great volunteer team who helped us out here. I'm going to be very quick running through this right now because we've just found out we set a record for the most number of slides. We got so much great information. We're so excited about what we have here that we generated an incredible amount of information. And with that, starting off here. The SDAT team, we've done over 200 of these around the country. The whole point of this is to do community-based engagement to help bring effective design strategies, design solutions to cure some problems here. Basically, the whole point of this is that it's an integrated design process where we really have take a holistic view towards our challenges we face here. This is what we've been doing with Pacific Beach and Mission Beach so far. The important point is that we've been out there, been asking lots of questions, talking to lots of people, and started to really formulate some good information. I think what's interesting, you'll find out in a minute here, is that we all went off and did a series of analyses from our own unique perspectives from each team member. And what's interesting is to see how everything seemed to overlay and point back to some very common issues that we all have some good strategies for. So a couple of big things to talk about. As a sustainable design assessment team, we look at a very holistic approach towards sustainability. It's not just environmental sustainability or economic sustainability. Social sustainability is really important too. So it's how do you build community? How do you create spaces that are accommodating, welcoming to all? How do you look at creating a greater sense of civic engagement and sense of community with your neighbors? So with that, some basic data points I want to talk about. This is average block size. What it tells you is that we have a relatively dense, modestly sized block sizes here in the communities, which validates what we found on the ground. Concordant with that is intersection density. We have lots of intersections. That means there are lots of opportunities for spaces where the public can bump into one another. Gross household density, it's a fairly dense environment compared to other parts of San Diego. Residential density, same thing, that you see some fairly dense environments around here. Here's what gets interesting. Housing costs. Yellow is good, less than 30% of your area median income being spent on housing costs. Yellow is good, blue's bad. So you see some parts are defined pretty much as affordable. However, transportation costs. The equal metric says you should be spending less than 15% of your income on transportation costs. That should be something coded yellow on this image. The entire area is defined as unaffordable for transportation. You guys are spending a lot of money getting back and forth here. And if you aggregate those two together, there's a lot of people are spending above what they should be to cover both housing costs and transportation costs. Employment access, there's a fair amount of jobs here, and Ed's will be talking a lot about that in a minute here. Here's another interesting thing. Once again, dark being bad, light being good. Greenhouse gas emissions per acre here. Because transportation is such a heavy impact, a lot of greenhouse gases are being emitted primarily through vehicle miles if you're traveling in cars. And it gets a little better if you start looking at greenhouse gases per acre. Because we have a fairly dense environment, each person is emitting relatively less greenhouse gases, but it's still a huge impact. Here's another sort of scary slide, the equivalent of the blank blue there. Dark would be good, light would be bad for transit connectivity. And what you see there is that pretty much for the entire study area, the average is less than 0.3 rides on public transportation per week. So clearly there's an absolute reliance upon automobile transportation to get around this community. Another thing to look at here too is the idea of a food desert and the fact that a large portion, well, a third of the community here does not have ready access to grocery stores within walking distance. You have to drive there. Talk a little bit about Walkscore. Walkscore.com. It's a commonly used metric across the country for measuring the viability of walkable communities. The higher the number, the better. 9 to 100 is Walker's Paradise. 0 to 24 is absolutely car dependent. And for the relatively dense, highly interconnected community that is here, you would think we'd score pretty highly here. And the reality of it is, this is kind of the heat map. Green is good, red is bad. For Pacific Beach, you have a couple of zones, especially along Garnet Avenue, where you get some green. It's fairly walkable, but you have other parts, especially towards Sessions Park, where it starts to be less and less walkable. Same thing. It's a little bit more of an artifact for the Mission Beach community. One of the things that Walkscore measures is access to services and amenities, banks, schools, things like that. And just since it's such a heavily residential community, you can't walk to the bank because there's no bank there. So, but here's the basic numbers. Average walk score for Mission Beach, 59. For Pacific Beach, 71. An area on Missouri Street that Steve's going to be treating with some additional study in a minute here, you'll see, had a walk score 75. But you see down along Garnet Avenue, walk score 95. So there are areas that have access to the multitude of functions and amenities that you want and can have a truly walkable community. Another little factoid here is that we have the potential for looking at new market tax credits in the census tracts. They're marked in red and a little bit more in yellow as well. New market tax credits are intended to promote jobs and employment in what are termed to be distressed census tracts. The key thing to remember is they're worth 39% of hard and soft costs of construction for development. So if you're looking at doing a redevelopment project and creating jobs out of that, you're looking at almost 40% cut in your cost, or in other words, 60 cents on the dollar you'd have to spend to do a new development there. We worked really hard over the night, and that's the master plan we came up with for you guys. Think about it. It's mixed use, walkable pedestrian scale, public transit access. One of the things we want to emphasize is the bones are here. A lot of the work that I do back out east is looking at the adaptive use and embedding sustainable design principles into older structures. First thing we do is try and figure out what is the bad stuff that's been added over the last 50, 60 years that we can reverse out and allow the buildings, or allow the communities in this case, to function as they're originally intended. One of the things you have to think about is that our goals from a sustainability perspective is to drive down dependence on fossil fuels and drive down the dependence on carbon-based sources of energy. We used to have to live like that because we didn't have ready access to gasoline. We didn't have ready access to electricity. We know how to design from both a building scale and a community-based scale environments that don't require great deals of input of additional energy. So once again, just looking back at some of the historic slides here, what's important about it, one of the things is I found intriguing that Pacific Beach was designed to be it was never intended to be just a beach community, that it was a civic space. You have a racetrack over there. You have a college, plans for a college campus. The folks who planned this out intended it to be a fully diverse, fully engaged community that you could live and work and play there. Same thing, looking at some of the old Sanborn maps here. This is sort of some uses back from about 1940. You see it's a wide variety of uses that were there. So that Garnet Avenue has always had a mixture of functions there. If you zoom in a little bit there, you know, you had gas stations, you had a paint store, you had a restaurant, you know, sort of you had a wide variety of functions and uses there. Mission Beach, once again, was intended to always be much more residential in nature, other than what drove all this in the first place. One of the things that was intriguing in doing research here is that Mission Beach actually predates Pacific Beach, and it was laid out as so many other resorts were laid out in the early start of the 20th century. A real estate company would buy a piece of land that's attractive on the shore somewhere. They would lay out a streetcar line to get people out there. They'd put an amusement that would draw people out there in the end, and they would develop all the residential parcels around it to actually fund it. But it was based upon the idea of public transportation. And over time, you see that when it was first built out, there was an amusement park there and not much else. Over time, a little bit more growth around there, a little bit more growth around there. This is back in the 40s. You see, still fairly underpopulated right now, that bit by bit, the community was built out. Even here, looking at the Crystal Pier, you can see even back in the 50s and early 60s, a lot of that was parking lot. That's a much, if you look at that end of the west end of Garnet Avenue now, is a much more denser environment now. So this space has evolved and changed over time. So I look at a couple things being sustainable. One of the things to talk about is the importance of looking at renewable energies and starting to reduce our reliance upon electricity generated remotely here. So, one thing is to say, okay, PV panels, it's a pretty obvious thing. You guys in San Diego, it's the sunny heaven here. There's absolutely no reason why solar panels shouldn't be used on almost any object, any opportunity here. And the costs have driven down so much that we're doing projects now where are in essence zero cost to the owners or tenants of the building, because we have third parties will come in and say, look, we'll install it, we'll own it, or operate it. We'll actually sell you reduced cost electricity, and at no upfront cost to you. So you can do that, or you can look and do initial investment, but the economics for solar now work, and clearly it's been embraced within the state of California and their energy portfolio mandates. So we have, you can do everyday PVs. You can also have some fun with it, like lower right there. You can start to do sculptural things with it. But what's even more interesting is that looking at infrastructure beyond just bolting PVs onto the roof, what else can you do? Let's look at street lighting. Let's look at solar charging stations for cars. So you look at promoting both the PVs, the photovoltaics, electricity, but then also the charging stations for electric cars that we should be using here. And once again, you start having fun with, these charging stations could be something other than a shed. And even with street lights too, one of the things we heard about Pacific Beach is that it should be fun. So you got lights. And you got lights. How cool would it be to have these wild structural things? These are all solar powered, by the way. It's an artist who does this work up in the Northwest, which, by the way, gets less sunlight than you do. How cool to have these glowing icons to provide the additional lighting and wayfinding and graphic identity for the community scattered along throughout the community. But other things is for photovoltaics, it's no longer this, you have to bolt on. You have building integrated photovoltaics. You have things that look like standard roof tiles. You have even here, look at these are new tiles that come out there that look like the traditional clay tiles. So you don't have to do something that does not fit into the existing architecture of the community here. San Diego Gas and Electric's done a good job. They have a pretty diverse portfolio of renewable energies. However, that's still, right now in 2009, it was 11% of their portfolio. They're trying to get up towards 36% by 2015. The majority of the energy consumption here is still non-renewable based. So we need to look at ways we can drive this consumption down. One other thing we looked at besides photovoltaics is wind power. If you look here, actually, this is from National Renewable Energy Laboratories. San Diego is actually in a poor area for wind power. So while one might think we're on the beach, we always have breezes here, there's not enough to really look at it, to look at driving wind power here. One of the key things for wind power is you put the turbines where you can actually generate useful amounts of electricity out of it. And unfortunately, San Diego doesn't have the winds that we need here. So we'll talk quickly about the third rail that everyone wants to talk about here. It's going to be parking, because clearly it's going to be an issue here that we're all going to talk about from different ways here. But it's really not about parking we're going to be talking about here. We're actually talking about a traffic mitigation strategy that involves parking. It's not just about parking, it's about, by the way, helping to pay for that third rail, which will be some public transportation here. One of the things we need to do is need to learn to value parking. One of the interesting things right now is that free parking has no value. It's like anything else. If it's given to you for free, you take it for granted. You don't really appreciate what it is, and it has minimal value at that point. We went out, we talked to you. For those of you who were here on Wednesday night, we were asking for the kind of what words do you use to describe San Diego? What words do you use to describe Pacific Beach and Mission Beach, and why are you guys here? Healthy and outdoors. Why are we in cars all the time when you have the climate, you have the weather, you have the sun, you have the desire to be healthy, to be outdoors, to walk? You guys want to do that. We get that. So, there's an internal contradiction between saying we need lots and lots of parking, and yet we also want to be outdoors and healthy lifestyles. We'll also be looking a little more about the fact that we have an internal and external circulation challenges that we'll be talking more about in a moment here. So, and the other cool thing about parking, what we might want to do with that is we already have an implementation mechanism in place. We have a business development entity that can look at parking and potentially fee-based parking, and we'll have to come up with a new structure for that. It already exists. We all recognize changing behavior can be tough. We need to move more towards walking and biking. That's what is good for the environment, and that's what you guys have said you want to do. And public transit. Internally, what we want to focus on is the idea about if you need to go 2, 3 blocks, 4 blocks to visit the store, go to school, we want to help find ways to get you to walk or bike there, but also recognize the point that commuting, if you're going outside of Pacific Beach and Mission Beach, you're not going to walk there, probably not going to bike there. We need to find alternate means to get in the car, though, which is going to be looking at public transit. So, what are some of the disincentives there? We have opportunities and incentives. So it's what's the carrot and the stick. So disincentives we've discussed are things like the fact there are multiple models for parking fees. You can do the traditional put parking meters, and you charge people to park on the streets. That's a relatively blunt tool, but it is somewhat effective. We also look at peak demand charges. What about, one of the challenges we see is that parking is the absolute highest demand, and the circulation tends to kludge up the most during the summer when everyone wants to be here on the beach. So what about an idea that you only charge for parking when parking's at a premium, and we could say, right now we've been touring around here, really you guys aren't underparked right now, that we saw lots of open parking spaces when we're tooling around here. It's only during the peak demand era. So how do you start changing behavior by saying we're going to charge you when everyone else wants to be here as well? The idea that there could be residential parking permit programs, that one of the things that as a community you decide is that something that residents can always park for free here, which would be an amenity, but also is going to be, is not going to help drive people to walk and bike, but is one option here. Or you can say certain zones of the community have a residential parking permit program, but the commercial districts would not. Let's talk about incentives here. One of the things we talked about here is potential is a shuttle loop, that we have a new transit stop coming through here. If we can drive down enough the demand to drive to the beach here, which Steve will be talking about in a second here, the potential is to get people from the shuttle, from the metro rail, from the light rail stop into the beach and not have to drive in here at all. So you go light rail station to the beach. If we do this right and team the two together here, that shuttle could be free, paid for by the parking revenues to people who do want to come in here. So the idea would be to give that incentive to take the shuttle is, it's free. Yeah, I got to pay to park, but it's free to ride the shuttle. Why would you not do that? And the other thing we also want to talk about on more of the internal versus external circulation is the better pedestrian experience, which we'll be seeing lots of great examples of momentarily here. Basically to make walking, biking, and every other modes of transportation, rollerblading, skateboarding, everything does here, less scary, more enjoyable. Get people to want to get out and tour around the neighborhoods on foot. And with that, Ed, you're up.